47 American paratroopers entered this jungle. 19 came out. The rest were swallowed by the greenery, dragged into tunnel networks so deep that recovery teams never found them. And you know what the Pentagon did? They drew a red line on the map and wrote 3 words: "Off-limits, Australians only." Wait, Australians? The guys from the country with more kangaroos than soldiers. These Australians were allowed to go where U.S. Marines were forbidden to set foot. And this story gets even wilder, because what these Aussie operators were doing in the Tien Son Mountains, their methods, tactics, and the traces they left for the Viet Cong, were so effective and disturbing that American liaison officers requested emergency transfers just to get away from them. One Marine sergeant returned from a joint patrol and submitted a 2-word report that was immediately classified. Those words: "We're amateurs." You're about to discover why the most powerful military on Earth handed over 14 square kilometers of Vietnamese jungle to 150 men from a country most Americans couldn't locate on a map. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Viet Cong stopped calling them soldiers. They called them something else: Maung, the jungle ghosts. Stay with me. 23 kilometers southeast of the Australian base at Nui Trong, the Tien Son Mountains rose from the coastal plains like the spine of some ancient beast. From the air, the Lin Sun Range appeared deceptively small, just 14 kilometers of jungle-covered limestone stretching toward the South China Sea. American aerial reconnaissance had photographed every square meter. B-52 bombers dropped over 40,000 tons of ordnance on its slopes between 1966 and 1968. The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, conducted 3 major operations into its northern approaches. And yet, the Viet Cong's D-445 Provincial Mobile Battalion continued operating from caves and tunnel networks with apparent impunity. What the Americans could not understand, and what conventional military doctrine failed to explain, was that the Tien Son Mountains were not a position to be taken. They were a living organism, a network of underground rivers, limestone caverns, and tunnels expanded and fortified over more than 2 decades. The Viet Cong had not merely dug into the mountains, they had become part of them. This was only the first layer of a mystery that would haunt American military intelligence for the next 3 years. In March 1967, a company from the 173rd Airborne Brigade attempted a sweep and clear operation through the eastern approaches of the Tien Son Mountains. What happened in the following 72 hours led to the operation being classified at the highest levels of MACV command. 47 American paratroopers entered. 19 came out. The rest were not killed by conventional ambushes or booby traps. They simply vanished. Their bodies were never recovered, their fates unknown, their names added to the MIA lists that would haunt American families for decades. The official after-action report attributed the losses to enemy action and complex terrain. The unofficial assessment, circulated only among senior intelligence officers, told a different story. The Viet Cong had not fought the Americans. They had hunted them, systematically, patiently, one by one, pulling men from their patrol lines without a single shot being fired. This was the moment when MACV made a decision that would remain buried in classified archives for over 40 years. The Tien Son Mountains were declared off-limits to American ground forces. But the problem didn't disappear. The D445 Battalion continued launching attacks on Allied positions, and someone had to deal with them. Enter the Australians. To understand why the Pentagon turned to a force of barely 500 men to accomplish what 20,000 Marines could not, you first need to understand the unique nature of the Australian military presence in Vietnam. The first Australian task force arrived in Vinh Province in 1966, with a mandate that was fundamentally different from American operational doctrine. While U.S. forces measured success in body counts and territory seized, the Australians had been given one clear objective: pacify Vinh Province, using whatever methods they deemed necessary. And the key word here was whatever. Within this task force operated a unit so small it barely registered on American organizational charts: the Special Air Service Regiment, SAS. 3 squadrons rotated through Vietnam, never more than 150 men in country at a time. Officially, their designation was reconnaissance. In practice, their role was something far more primal, something that would make American interrogators at the Phoenix program look like amateurs. Captain William "Billy" Dundas commanded the 2nd Squadron SAS since February 1968. A former sheep station manager from rural Queensland, Dundas had never seen combat before his first tour in Borneo during the Indonesian confrontation of 1965. What he learned in the dense Borneo jungles, tracking insurgents through terrain so thick that visibility rarely exceeded 3 meters, would transform him into something the Viet Cong had never faced before. But the true revelation came not from Dundas himself, but from the men under him, and specifically from a group whose very existence the Australian government would deny for decades: the Aboriginal trackers of the Australian Army. Private Dorian Walker, a Pentubi man from the Western Desert, had senses honed by 40,000 years of survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. He could track a man through jungle so dense that American infrared sensors detected only a green blur. He could determine the age of a footprint within 6 hours by the moisture of disturbed vegetation. He could smell the diet of a Vietnamese soldier from 400 meters downwind. When Walker first arrived at Nui Trang in April 1968, the American liaison officer assigned to the Australian task force, May CV Captain James Morrison, dismissed the tracker program as colonial nostalgia. Aboriginals tracking humans in Vietnam. Preposterous. A relic of 19th century frontier warfare, transplanted into the age of helicopters and sensors. 17 days later, Morrison would completely revise his opinion, under circumstances that led him to request immediate reassignment back to American command. Before we dive into what Morrison witnessed, we need to understand the tactical philosophy that made Australian SAS operations so different. The American approach to counterinsurgency was simple: find the enemy, fix them in position, and destroy them with overwhelming firepower. This doctrine had crushed conventional armies across 3 continents. But in the triple canopy jungles of Southeast Asia, it had one fatal flaw: you cannot destroy what you cannot see. The Viet Cong understood this intimately. They had studied American tactics for years before the 1st Marine battalions hit Dong. They knew Americans moved in large units, made noise, and followed predictable patterns. They relied on artillery and air support to compensate for tactical limitations. Against such an enemy, the jungle itself became the ultimate weapon. All you had to do was wait. Australian SAS doctrine inverted every assumption of American warfare. Where Americans moved in platoon or company strength, Australian patrols consisted of 5 men. Where Americans cleared jungle with defoliants and napalm, Australians moved silently, disturbing not a single leaf. Where Americans announced their presence with helicopter insertions and radio chatter, Australians approached from kilometers away, established ambush positions, and waited in absolute silence for days at a time. But the most significant difference, the one that shocked American observers, was psychological. Australian SAS operators did not see themselves as soldiers conducting counterinsurgency operations. They saw themselves as hunters. And in hunting, there is no such thing as a fair fight. The first documented American observation of these methods occurred on June 15, 1968, when Captain Morrison accompanied a 5-man patrol into the northern approaches of the Tien Son Mountains. The patrol left Nui Trang at 0300 hours, moving on foot through 8 kilometers of rubber plantation before reaching the jungle fringe. Morrison immediately noted that the Australians moved differently from any American unit he had served with. No talking, no hand signals, no sound whatsoever. The patrol leader communicated through a system of touches, shoulder for stop, arm for direction. Morrison missed half of them. By dawn, they had covered 12 kilometers and established a position overlooking a trail used as a courier route by D445 Battalion. By dawn, the patrol had covered 12 kilometers and established a position overlooking a narrow trail intersection. Intelligence suggested it was a courier route used by D445 Battalion to move messages between cave complexes. What happened next became the centerpiece of Captain Morrison's classified after-action report. The Australians did not construct a conventional ambush. They did not dig fighting positions or establish overlapping fields of fire. Instead, 4 men dissolved into the undergrowth on either side of the trail. The 5th, Private Walker, moved forward alone. For 20 minutes, Walker studied the trail. He crouched low, lowering his face to within centimeters of the soil. He touched leaves, bent grass, disturbed vines. At one point he paused, lifted his head, and sniffed the air. Morrison watched in confusion. To him, the trail looked empty, undisturbed, lifeless. When Walker returned, he whispered something to the patrol leader, so quietly that Morrison, standing less than 2 meters away, could not hear a single word. The patrol leader nodded. The Australians began repositioning, moving so slowly it barely registered as movement at all. Minutes stretched into hours. 11 hours later, a 3-man Viet Cong courier team walked directly into the kill zone. They never saw the Australians. The first indication of danger came when the lead courier triggered a pressure-released detonator connected to a claymore mine. The explosion was controlled, directional, and muted by jungle density. The entire engagement lasted 4 seconds. 3 enemy dead, 0 Australian casualties, no shots fired that could be heard beyond 50 meters. But this was not what disturbed Morrison. What disturbed him came after. Standard American doctrine called for immediate extraction after contact. Hit hard. Get out. Avoid reinforcement. The Australians did none of that. They stayed. For 6 more hours, the patrol remained hidden, watching the trail. At 14:30 hours, a second Viet Cong element arrived. A 7-man search team sent to investigate why the couriers never reported in. What they found broke them. The bodies had been arranged deliberately. The 3 dead couriers were seated upright against trees. Their eyes were open. Their weapons rested across their laps, as if they were simply resting. Each man had a playing card tucked into his collar. The ace of spades. From 50 meters away, Morrison could see the effect immediately. The search team clustered together instead of spreading out. Their movements became frantic. One man vomited. Another fired blindly into the jungle, emptying his magazine at shadows. The Australians did not engage. They watched. The Viet Cong collected their dead and retreated at twice the speed they had arrived, abandoning all tactical discipline. Morrison's report concluded with a sentence that would echo through classified intelligence channels for years. Australian SAS does not conduct ambushes. They conduct psychological warfare operations using enemy bodies as the primary medium of communication. Effectiveness unprecedented. Personal recommendation: I do not wish to participate in future joint operations. But Morrison had only seen the surface. The true depth of Australian SAS methodology became clear during the Tien Son operation of October 1968. Australian signals intelligence suggested something American analysts dismissed as impossible. D. 445 Battalion had established a regimental-scale headquarters complex inside the mountain cave system. Not just combat units, but a field hospital, political cadre training center, and arms caches sufficient to sustain operations for 6 months. American options were limited. B-52 strikes were ineffective against deep limestone caves. Helicopter insertions were suicide due to anti-aircraft coverage. Ground assaults required forces that 3rd Marine Division could not spare. The Australian solution was elegant and terrifying. They would not destroy the complex. They would map it. Every entrance, every exit, every supply route, every personnel movement. And they would do it using 5-man patrols operating inside the enemy's own security perimeter for up to 3 weeks at a time. Over the next 4 months, Australian SAS conducted 17 long-range reconnaissance patrols into the Tien Son Mountains. The intelligence they gathered filled more than 3,000 pages of classified reports. But the real effect was psychological. The Viet Cong began seeing ghosts. It started with reports of movement that left no trace. Guards heard snapped twigs, rustling vegetation, but found nothing. Men disappeared during routine movements. No gunfire, no blood, no bodies. Captured D-445 battalion logs later revealed a unit descending into paranoia. November 3rd, 1968. 3 comrades failed to return from water collection. No evidence of contact. Political officer suspects desertion. Commander disagrees. November 7th. Sentry Position 4 reported presence at 0200. Flare illumination revealed nothing. Sentry found at dawn. Throat cut. Adjacent positions heard nothing. November 12th. Movement restricted to daylight hours only. Request for reinforcement denied. Area considered secure from American operations. The area was secure from Americans. It was not secure from Australians. Private Walker identified 17 habitual movement paths, runs, used by Viet Cong personnel. Like animal trails, they represented the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of movements. The Australians did not close these routes. They turned them into killing grounds. They struck unpredictably, then vanished. By December 1968, D445 Battalion had effectively ceased offensive operations. Their manpower remained. Their supplies were intact, their weapons functional. But their will was gone. They were being hunted by something they could not see, could not understand, and could not fight. Why did Australian methods succeed where American doctrine failed? The answer lies not in technology, not in firepower, and not in numbers. It lies in philosophy. American military doctrine of the 1960s assumed that superior firepower equals superior results. More bullets, more bombs, more helicopters, more troops. If something didn't work, add more of it until it did. Australian doctrine came from a different tradition entirely. Small wars, frontier survival, and colonial policing. Their military history had taught them that patience, fieldcraft, and psychological manipulation could achieve results that artillery and air power could not. The Australians approached jungle warfare with a different emotional register. Where Americans displayed anxiety, frustration, or fear, SAS operators moved with calm confidence, a sense of ownership over the jungle. They were hunters, not conventional soldiers. The transformation of ordinary Australians into jungle phantoms did not happen by accident. SAS selection was brutal. It tested the mind before the body. Candidates were chosen for high pain tolerance, low need for social validation, predatory patience, ability to remain motionless for hours while maintaining complete awareness, capacity to act with explosive violence after long periods of inactivity. Only 1 in 12 candidates completed selection. Training lasted 18 months, 3 times longer than U.S. Special Forces programs of the era. And much of it took place in the Australian outback, under Aboriginal trackers, who never wrote down their methods. The cut boot ritual shocked American observers. SAS operators removed the soles of their boots and walked on strips of tire rubber to leave no trace. From a distance, they were invisible, not Australians at all, but creatures of the bush armed with Western weapons. And the psychological warfare, that went far beyond killing. The body display doctrine involved staging enemy deaths to communicate messages, weapons positioned to suggest the victim had witnessed something terrible, playing cards left as calling cards, even rearranging equipment while enemy guards slept. By spring 1969, the Tien Son Mountains were effectively Australian territory. Not because D445 Battalion had been destroyed, they remained in their caves, but because their will had been broken. Soldiers refused to patrol, commanders' orders went unexecuted, morale collapsed. The men who became hunters in the Tien Son Mountains did not return to civilian life unchanged. Psychological trauma followed them home. Post-traumatic stress among Australian Vietnam veterans eventually exceeded that of their American counterparts, despite fewer casualties. These men had learned to think like predators, and predators do not easily return to the herd. Private Dorian Walker returned to the Western Desert in 1970, never serving again. He lived among his people, refusing interviews. "That knowledge belongs to the jungle," he said. It stays there. Captain William Dundas remained in the Australian Army until 1982, commanding SAS units. His lectures on jungle warfare methodology remain required reading at the Australian Defence Force Academy. He passed away in 2015. Captain James Morrison, the American observer who had witnessed the Tien Son operations, returned to the U.S. and never spoke publicly about what he saw. His reports survive in classified archives, a testament to methods American doctrine could not adopt, and Australian authorities were not ready to acknowledge. Today, special operations forces around the world study Australian SAS techniques from Vietnam: tracking, long-range patrols, psychological operations. These tactics have become standard in elite units. But one thing remains elusive: the psychology of the hunter, the willingness to become something other than a soldier, to enter the jungle not to fight, but to become the forest itself, stalking prey that cannot see you. That is the legacy of the Maung, the jungle ghosts of the Tien Son Mountains.